Thank you, Ashley and Joe and Rennie. And good morning and welcome to those of you who are joining us up online this morning. I have a secret. Uh-oh. In preparation for Sunday's lesson, I read the Daily Word ahead of time. I know, scandalous. I actually read it on Tuesday. I had a friend one time told me that you just can't do that. You only can read the Daily Word on the day of the Daily Word. And I thought, well, sometimes I like to read ahead, So I was reading the Daily Word for today, and it just, how it hits you in a different way than it usually does? And it was the affirmation for today, to celebrate the gift of life. And I thought to myself, oh, the gift of life with the capital L. I don't know about you, but when I read things like that in sort of a really quick passing, I sometimes think about it as just my physical life. What I'm doing, where I'm going, what's happening to me right now, or what isn't happening right now, and a very sort of an awareness of just the physicality of my life. But as I was reading that, and as I was going through the week and kind of thinking more about it, I thought to myself, that's not what it's talking about at all. What it's really talking about is the gift of life. The life that infuses me and you and all of us. The life that is eternal and is ongoing. And in one sense has nothing to do with our human body. And in another sense, of course, it has everything to do with our body. And that it's more than just how I make this chronological journey around the sun, but it's really tapping into the very essence of the mechanism, if you will, that keeps us moving. And I thought to myself, it's kind of like a digital clock, because, of course, I can see our digital clock as I'm standing here. And, when we look at the clock, what we normally do is we really don't focus on the time. What we focus on is, am I on time or am I not on time? Is this the right time or is it the time zone or whatever it might be? We don't really look at the clock. And then the other side of it is the digital readout is not the mechanism of the clock. What runs the digital clock is all the stuff when I take the faceplate off, and that's what's running it behind the scenes. And so I thought, isn't that so like a metaphor of our lives? We have this mechanism, if you will, called eternal life, running behind the scenes. And the way we project our digital display out into the world is from this very real human perspective. And it's so important for us to kind of get that there's this twofold drama kind of going on all at one time, because all too often we either get in the very spiritual place and, nothing in my human life, and we deny it and don't even pay attention to it, or we go all the way to the opposite extreme and it's all about our human life and there's no spirituality to it. So what happens over the course of time is that we begin to desensitize to this union. We begin to lose sight of the digital display is not what's running the clock. The human beingness of me isn't all my doing. It's the eternal life that is moving through me in each and every moment. Yet, you and I know that we sort of begin to tune out the world, don't we? There comes a place where we just can't absorb any more. But here's the downside of that. We tune out the news, we tune out the weather, we tune out this, we tune out that. And in some respects, we almost have to, because it's an overload of information. Yet, at the very same time, by doing that, we also tune out God. It's a delicate balance, isn't it? It's a fine line. And so I challenged you last week to a 90-day challenge. Now, some of you were not here, but you saw it on Facebook about what is going on here. And basically what we're doing, and I invite you to participate, from last Sunday till Sunday, September the 1st, I will be posting every single day on the church's Facebook page a quote. And I invite you to also post a spiritual quote. And here's the reason. Because I think it's so important for us when we say we want to be attuned to God's voice, when we say we want to be attuned to spiritual direction, but we have tuned so much out, we have to reteach ourselves to listen differently for that speaking of spirit. And a lot of times the way we think of that is we think of it as God is going to show up, Marianne Harris, here is the word from on high. But it doesn't really happen that way. You know, it happens in a poem. It happens in a street sign. It happens in some tune I've got on the radio. It happens as I'm walking to some book that I'm reading, some poetry. And I just love all of you posting on Facebook, because now what we're getting, this is the upside of it, we have this wonderful repertoire of spiritual quotes that are very meaningful. So like today, my quote was from Helen Keller. Yesterday, it was from Christopher Reeves. It could be a Bible quote. It could be a poem. It could be whatever you want. Please make sure you note who the author is. That would be most kind. But what I begin to see in that, in the engagement of that activity, is it begins to connect us to that inner attunement that as we go through life, you know, it intrigues me. It fascinates me. I read the Daily Word every single day. Why did that one phrase hit me on that day, still speaks to me today? It's the celebration of the gift of life. It's no accident, my friends. You see? And if we're not attuned to it, then we just gloss on by it. And then we say, well, you know, my life is so awful, and God isn't speaking to me. And we must be careful. Here's another thing. I just want to put a disclaimer out there. You know, God doesn't speak to us by these voices in our head. We call that schizophrenia, okay? That's, and in a way, it's sort of funny, but it is actually serious, because people will say, I heard God speak to me and I'm supposed to shoot somebody. How many times have we heard that on the news? Okay, so we must be really careful to attune ourselves to the still small voice that does not speak in words. God is beyond words. God is beyond feeling. God is movement and vibration. Why did those words strike my vibrational center so that I looked at them again? Why do the certain messages, certain poems, certain speeches, certain, phrases, they strike us in a resonant field that makes us pay attention? And that's what we're trying to drive at, is getting to that place of that paying attention when that resonant field has been struck, when that chord has been touched. Because in that moment, is a unique message just for you. And sometimes, as we all have learned, that message isn't always apparent right in the moment, like what does it mean? Sometimes we just kind of sit with it, and we kind of move through it, like, that really touched my life, but I'm not sure what it means, and I journal about it, and I pray about it, and I read about it, and then maybe someone else will say something to me, and I go, that's it. That's exactly it. And we saw this. It was really a great, sort of a great awakening yesterday in our women's group. We had little phrases that we were praying about and praying with. And somebody said, all week long I was struggling with what am I feeling? And that word came up. I was struggling to articulate it. I was struggling to give it voice. I just had all this emotion and all this feeling, and there was that word. That's that attunement. That's that vibrational sort of shifting, that resonant field that we sense and know in our heart and in our soul. The other thing I shared with you last week is the idea that unity doesn't really have what I'm going to call a program, or the 7 steps, or the like we had talked about the 12-step program the month before. And so what happens is that leaves us with a little bit of drifting. And in order to sort of increase our spiritual nature, to open up and expand, sometimes we need a benchmark to say we're on track. And sometimes we need a challenge to say, I got to step up my game here a little bit. So I thought to myself, as I was going through the week, what could we say as sort of examination of conscience, if you will, a kind of a benchmark of what we might just look at in a very generic way to call it sort of the way unity might help us to both challenge us and encourage us in our spiritual journey. So I've been playing with this all week long, and I thought, there's various aspects of our lives. The first to me is always a heart check. It's always a heart check. And where do we go with the heart check? We have to go to that place where Jesus tells us, what's in your heart? He poses that question. Because what's in your, where's your treasure? Because where your treasure is where your heart is. And this is so interesting as we see it played out in the world around us just recently, with the recent disasters. When Travis Meyer goes out there to interview somebody and he says to them, what do you miss most about your house that was flooded or the tornado? What does, people look around and say, the groceries I bought at Walmart last weekend, I miss those the most. No one has ever said that. What do they say? Travis, I just thank God I'm alive and my family's alive. And because I know that we're alive and we're together, we'll rebuild. We can handle anything. Why? Because where my treasure is are these people. This is my heart. This is my life. So do we have to wait for a disaster to ask ourselves that question? Sometimes we do. Sometimes when we lose somebody, we go, wow, I didn't know how much they meant to me. And so to ask ourselves, where is our treasure? Because, we get busy with everyday life. The second thing about sort of doing a heart check to me is, again, another passage out of Matthew where God says, why are you worried? That, I have to tell you, hands down, that is the passage that challenges me more than anything. God says, look, or Jesus is quoted saying, look at the birds of the air and the lilies of the field. Now, a lot of people translate like, yeah, but they don't have to work for a living. Wrong. They're doing what they were purposefully and intentionally created to do. Birds of the air are being birds, and the lilies of the field are being the lilies, and that's what they were created to do. And the lilies do not grow up and say, I don't want to be a lily today. I don't want to be beautiful. And you know what else I saw too as the past storms have gone on? They just kind of bend with the wind. They kind of go with the flow. And the sun came out and our garden is overflowing. But what we do is we say, well, I didn't get this and I didn't get that. And so God isn't with me. We need a heart check. Where is our heart for God? We need an emotional check, I think, checking all our sort of systems, if you will. Because Jesus once again tells us, what do we have to do emotionally? Love our enemies. Oh, it's so easy, he says. Anybody can love the people who love you. But when we love people who are different, when we love people who seem to be so unloving. Now, hear me clearly. This is not where you take them into your house and you give them your MasterCard and you let them run all over you. There are boundaries to people. Certainly there are. There's wisdom involved here. But love is an energy that flows from us. And if we can't look at people, regardless of their race, their color, their creed, their lifestyle choice, it doesn't matter what it is, and say, maybe I don't understand you, maybe I don't get your religious belief system or where you live or how you do things, but I still am called to love. Always, always, always. Because the counterside of the love is forgiveness, isn't it? Jesus tells us to forgive. How many times? Over and over and over again. And And you know who's the hardest person to forgive? Ourselves. So I wonder, if in our system check, if we spent that time forgiving 70 times 7 on ourselves. The way life is, the way things turned out, the choices that we've made, the up and the downside of where things have happened, how we landed in life. That sense of a system check that allows that energy to flow through, because that's what we're talking about, a loving energy that flows from us, to us, through us. We're part of that great cycle. How about a mental check? What are we watching? What are we bringing into our mind? As we think we are. And it's often so true is that, what we eat, we become. Because eventually, the more we eat of it, the more our body begins to respond in an outworking of it. Well, the more we begin to think, there's one thing about getting information. I need some information about maybe some of the rescue relief that is happening in our county. Okay, I need that information. But to dwell on it, I think to me that's the difference between gleaning information and dwelling. It's that dwelling on it. Oh my gosh, isn't it awful? And look at the fear and these poor people. And then we become stuck. We're not going anywhere. So guarding the gates of our minds, because what we think about, what we dwell on is no different than what we eat. And eventually we become. And what's interesting to me is we look around at the world and we say, those people that are so judgmental and they're very hateful. Well, the more we feed on that, guess who's the next person in line to become the judgmental, hateful people? You cannot divorce yourself. It's our duty, our responsibility to live out a life and to bring into our psychic experience, our mental facility, the good things in life and the beauty and the wonder. I'm not saying there's not bad things. I'm not saying there's not evil out in the world. But you got a choice just like I do. Do you want to sit here or do you want to sit here? And if we want to be peaceful people in the world, we must first be peaceful people in our mind. So we have a mental check. And then we have a spiritual check. Throughout the month of March and April, we talked about the universal Christ. And I so love that whole concept and idea. Whether you're Christian believing or not, it's not about Jesus. That's what the whole point of the book, the articles that we saw, the sermons that I gave. It's this inherent understanding that in everything God is. In everything God is. There are no exceptions. There are no exclusions. And that, to me, is probably one of our greatest spiritual challenges. You see, the great incarnating principle, which Jesus came to demonstrate and talked about, this idea that God is enfleshed in our flesh, that is the challenge. How is everything we're experiencing in this moment, hot, cold, hungry, sleepy, whatever it might be, bored, happy, sad, concerned, confused, it doesn't really matter. Whatever we're feeling in this moment is part of the divine life, the gift of life. The gift, we need to celebrate the gift of life that is giving through us at all times. And the conduit could be small or large. And I think as we give a system check, if you will, we begin to say, I kind of got that river a little bit narrow, a little pinched on the edges. There's a place for me to work. I thought I did really well here. Or you know what? I went through that experience with a whole different perspective. And I'm grateful for that. We forget that sometimes when we work through a process and work through a system, sometimes the gift it also gives us is to know we've moved through stuff. Is to say, I see that differently now. I feel differently. I have evolved out of that sort of mucky place, and I'm going to see life differently. So I think that for all of us, however you design it, shall we say, it's important that we have in the old church they used to call it confession, the examination of conscience. But it's still a worthy thing to do. It's about attuning ourselves to that voice of God, to that presence, to that spirit, to look at the systems of our entire being, to look at our heart check, to look at our emotional nature, to cleanse our minds, and to ultimately stretch and grow. What is it that you believe about God? All too often, we've had a sense of God from when we were children, and we implanted that belief, and it comes up very strong. Listen to how you pray sometimes. God, up there, out there, yo, listen up. I've got a problem here, and you need to fix it. And God's like, you haven't got it yet. Keep working. You're heading in the right direction. God said, I'm not coming to fix anything. Have you all figured that out yet? God is not coming to fix anything because God is already there in the challenge, in the fixing, in the process, in the mind, in the heart that is open to receive new instructions, new guidance, and new direction. But you see, if we keep closing down, tuning things out, then we never develop the primary skill of the metaphor that surrounds us, of the poetry that sings in us, of the words that we speak to one another, of the times in the silence where we just know that we know, even though we don't know what it is that we know, but we're willing to sit with that knowing until we understand it. So we need, I believe, spiritual, I'm going to call them checkpoints. Because as people, as human beings, we need guideposts. We need a way to mark things. We want to have a program and we want to complete it. We want to get a diploma when we finish high school or college, all the celebrations that have been happening. And yet we struggle because our spiritual journey doesn't have a completion. We don't get a certificate. Ta-da! You finished the spiritual journey. You've walked the entire path, all 267 miles and 3 kilometers later. It isn't like that. It's an ongoing evolutionary journey. So if we can work in our own prayer life, it may not work for you, but it has struck a chord with me. How is it that I'm examining my spiritual journey, the little benchmarks along the way, the times when I hear that resonant field speaking directly to me? How can I open my attunement to hear more of it? You see, because that's the beauty of it. Those of you who are posting every day on Facebook, the more you do it, the more you hear. Because the more attuned you are making yourself out to be. Now, I recognize not everybody's a Facebook fan. That's all right. But I invite you to find something that every day, maybe it's an affirmation, I listen closely for the voice of God. I move in the direction of my understanding. I am one with the Spirit and the movement and the flow. Any minute now, it will be revealed to me what the direction I need to go. Whatever your affirmation is, whatever your process may be, it's important, I think, that we do have sort of like the trellis that the vine can climb. Because it's not just climbing, right? Once the vine starts to climb, it begins to grow and mature. And that's what we're here doing, finding spiritual checkpoints that'll help us grow and mature. so that when we do hear Spirit, we know exactly what that voice is. When we do understand the answer to questions, we know it's coming from deep within us and not from the noise in our head and the world around us. So make a practice and a habit to begin to look, to begin to listen for the times when the resonant field begins to shift and move, and to celebrate the great gift of life and the river of life from which the gift comes. Thank you for joining me today, and God bless.